What is different about the climate adaptation focus specifically is it targets you at a particular kind of things like drought or flood resistant crops. You can't just look at higher productivity, which is traditionally what you do, assuming that the weather patterns are going to be the same. That's research that often doesn't take place, particularly not in some of the crops that sub-Saharan Africa particularly depends on, like cassava or other ones which are not global staples. But it's also critically important to have breeds of crops, such as rice, that can be adapted to West African climate conditions, because West Africa is currently the world's largest rice importing region. And so in each of these areas, what the climate adaptation lens does is it gives you a specific focus on looking ahead at what and where are the areas, both in terms of the particular crops and seeds you might do, the way in which you use irrigation and fertilizer, because you need to be much more thoughtful and deliberate about water use, which has always been a scarce commodity and is getting scarcer in many countries. And so that's the difference.
Okay, and you actually have brought me to my next question. Around the $200 million pot, so to speak, that we're dealing with here, how much of that is going into funding crop research, seed research and distribution as well? And what specific crops do you have in mind? You've already mentioned rice and cassava, but are there specific others that you have in mind which would be a priority?
Yeah, so that's something that we will be working on with the Qatar Fund for Development going forward. We have agreed on an initial joint investment, which we will both be putting $20 million into, which is on so-called dual-use poultry. So that's, again, in livestock. But those are poultry, chickens that are specially adapted to thrive in some of the more adverse climate conditions that we see in parts of sub-Saharan Africa. And by dual use, they produce both eggs and can be used for meat. And so this can become both an important staple for households themselves and for increased income. And that's an example of something that, as the Gates Foundation, we've already piloted in Ethiopia and Nigeria, among other places. So we believe it's a proven model, and this investment will allow us to scale it up. Now, the next stage is to look for other similar investments in seeds specifically. We're hoping, I mentioned the CGIAR system. That's the global system. We are major funders of it. One of the potential things would be to partner with them around specific crops. They have deep expertise in areas like maize, another critically important staple for sub-Saharan Africa, and helping build drought-resistant maize that works in the temperate zones in Africa actually is a different kind of science for the maize that, say, is grown in North America. So that would be certainly a potential target. But this is something we'll want to look at both with our partners in Qatar, and also then looking to the experts in institutions like the CGIAR and at the National Agricultural Research level in particular African countries, because there's a lot of expertise and knowledge there that we want to be supporting and building on.
What about the distribution side of things? Because it's one thing to have these fantastic seeds of varieties of maize or cassava or rice that are well adapted to growing in drought-like conditions with a lot more heat, a lot less water. But if farmers can't get a hold of them affordably on a reliable basis, it sort of defeats the purpose of actually investing it in the first place. So will you also be investing in the distribution side of things?
Yeah. Oh, well, absolutely. I don't think this fund will specifically invest so much in the distribution side of it, because we're trying to look at the particular, crops things, although there is distribution in something like the dual-use poultry. But the distribution issue is a much wider issue than climate adaptation alone. That even today, most of sub-Saharan Africa uses varieties of many of the crops like maize, which are quite outdated. The entire continent needs to be moving on a cycle of getting better at cycling through more productive strains and crops more quickly. There's a lot of work going on that. Again, I mentioned our partner Agra, which that's one of the roles that it plays, working with many, many African countries to try and build that up. So what we want to do is make sure these are complementary. This fund is not going to be a single solution to all of these issues, but absolutely you need to do both, and you need to think about the investments in the new crops and tools and seeds, and in the distribution networks that get them out as quickly as possible.
Who will own the intellectual property around these seed varieties that are being developed as part of the investments that you're making with the Qatar Fund for Development?
Yeah, so well, one of the great things about the CGIR system and why we're such strong supporters of it is they are a collective public good for the world. They own it and they license it, and it's not, they don't do it with royalties. That's why it's an intergovernmental initiative, which highlights particularly up from potatoes to rice to wheat to maize. And we believe it's been a significantly underinvested in global partner for exactly those reasons. It's about public goods, not private goods.